Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks so much to Laura and Francesco for organising this symposium. It's such a privilege to be invited to come and speak, and thanks for joining me. I'm a postdoc in Nikki Clayton's Comparative Cognition Lab at the University of Cambridge, but today I'm going to talk about research that was done for my PhD at the University of Oxford, where I was supervised by Alex Kacelnik and Mark Walton. I'll talk about experiments I've done with goldfish, looking at information-seeking behavior, and then I'll follow up by looking at just giving you a brief overview of what I'm doing now, continuing on that. Information-seeking can facilitate efficient behavior, and that's true across a range of contexts. So whether that's in decision-making, where you're choosing between multiple options, in mate selection, and also in navigation. Generally, we think of information as being valuable because it allows individuals to better achieve their goals. And usually, these are extrinsic goals. So when we usually think about the value of information in the context of things like optimal foraging theory or rational theories of value-based decision-making, usually we think that information is useful because it allows you to improve some external goals. An example would be if you're looking at traffic lights when you're driving, you do that so that you can get information to help you better drive more safely. But also, many talks that we've seen so far at the conference also highlight that information can have intrinsic value. And that's particularly apparent in non-instrumental contexts where it doesn't appear that individuals are trying to maximize extrinsic benefits, such as food, but rather that they're driven by internal states, such as the amount of uncertainty that they're feeling. And that recently has become seen as a kind of a hallmark of curiosity, this idea that you seek out non-instrumental information. And so like Pierre's talk highlighted today, although curiosity-driven information seeking is really fundamental to human development in children and is potentially something that really sets us apart from other animals, there's quite a lot that we don't know about it. We're only starting to understand the cognitive mechanisms, development, adaptive value, and evolutionary origins of curiosity-driven information seeking. And in a recent review, we sort of proposed that the comparative method could be a really powerful way to better understand these different facets of curiosity-driven information-seeking behavior. And that's sort of a thread through the research that I'll present to you today. And in particular, how the comparative method can help us better understand the cognitive mechanisms that underlie information-seeking behavior and also its evolutionary origins. But how do we go about understanding information-seeking in animals or curiosity in animals? Like infants, they're nonverbal, but of a certain age, they can't report their states of curiosity. And recently, a non-instrumental information-seeking paradigm has been used to understand curiosity in animals. And this is a paradigm that actually goes back many years, about 75 years in the experimental psychology literature, but has been revived recently, particularly by studies in neuroscience, to say actually we can use this to better understand how animals seek information. So I'll go through the general task. Usually animals are presented with two options, so it's an alternative forced choice task. You have an information-poor option and an information-rich option. Task is actually quite simple, and the options are quite similar in that they're both presented simultaneously. They can be presented individually too, but they're presented as a choice. After you choose, there's a delay period, and after that delay period, there's an outcome. So the animal may or not receive reward. And so in the information-poor option, during this delay period, there's a non-informative cue about what that outcome will be. So it doesn't actually give you advanced information about what's going to happen. So individuals are uncertain during this delay period, and then at the end of it, there's a possibility that they do get some reward. In the information-rich option, the only difference is that as soon as you pick the option, you're given signals that anticipate what the outcome of a given trial will be. So as soon as you pick it, you still have this delay period, but you can either receive a S+, which tells you will get reward at the end of the trial, or S-, you won't get reward at the end of the trial. And so in this case, throughout that delay period, individuals are certain. And critically, subjects can't use the information in the informative option to maximize their reward gains over the course of these experiments or these trials. Once they get the information, they can't then back out and change what they've done. And so in a case where the information-rich option and information-poor option both have the same reward rate or probability of giving reward, many animals have been shown to strongly prefer the option that gives advanced prospective information. But this gets really extreme, and in some cases, some animals like pigeons, for example, have been shown to select the information-rich option even when it gives much less probability of reward compared to the other alternative, which has led people to suggest that this really highlights that information, prospective information, even though it's not instrumental, has a high subjective value that gets attributed to it. And that may be indicative of curiosity in non-human animals. So these are sort of examples of the plots where on the x-axis you have day, number of sessions, and the y-axis preference for the informative option. And animals develop very strong preferences for this. So example from macaques, one of our studies on rats, and also a study on starlings, animals develop strong preferences. But there are open questions. So empirically, this is quite well established now that animals have these strong preferences. But what do they actually mean? What can we draw from them? And so one of those questions is a long-standing question is what mechanisms drive informative preferences in these tasking animals? Does it really reflect some kind of analogous mechanisms that drive curiosity? And in particular, there's been a debate about whether individuals are sensitive to a reduction in uncertainty that occurs in the informative option, or whether actually these preferences are driven by associative processes that are widely shared across animals, and actually they're a byproduct of associative processes, not necessarily about information seeking per se. So on the one hand, you have that during this delay period, in the informative option, animals have certainty, but also one thing that could, and that's the idea that they're interested in uncertainty reduction, but also they often will see this cue that is strongly associated with reward. And it could be that just animals are selecting the option just because they very much like to see a good news stimulus. So that's one of the first questions that I was interested in with running this experiment with goldfish. And then the second is like, how widespread are these preferences? So now quite a few studies have been done in generally classic models in mammals and birds, but it's quite interesting to think about how widespread this is with regards to the evolutionary origins of the behavior. And that's where goldfish came in. So goldfish share widespread reinforcement learning mechanisms with other vertebrates, so basic associative processes. There are many studies on goldfish that show that they're capable of this. And so one idea we had was that, well, if these preferences in these non-instrumental information-seeking tasks are just driven by associative processes, basic ones, then we should expect to see that these preferences are also shared in goldfish. And that would reduce the need to invoke the argument that you need more complex forms of uncertainty sensitivity. And also they're quite phylogenetically distant to other species, so it really would give us an indication about whether these preferences are something that are widespread across all vertebrates or not necessarily. So the first step in carrying out these experiments was to think about how we could automate the study of decision-making in aquatic organisms. So in the species I showed before, like rats, macaques, this is all done very nice using refined methods where data can be extracted quite rapidly and experiments are closed loop without requiring experimenter involvement, which comes with a lot of benefits. But when we were looking at running this experiment in goldfish, we figured that quite often these experiments are run by hand, and we wanted to have a system where we could get quite comparable data from species that have already been run. So that was the first part of this project, was setting up this open source system to study decision-making in aquatic organisms, and it's sort of organized in a wire maze configuration. So you've got a screen that can present stimuli, and there's a camera that's continuously recording the animals as they move around. And in particular, then we collaborated with engineers at the Champalamo Foundation in Portugal to have designed and produced a feeder that we could control using Bonsai, which is an open source programming language. And so all of the sort of external hardware components can be connected up at a fairly cheap price, and that can allow you to set up conditioning experiments. And so the way we do it, the way we run trials for this information seeking task is individuals need to first swim to a start position to start trial, and they can move into one of two choice zones, which is essentially could be the informative option or the non-informative option. So this is an example of a training trial where a goldfish is sort of doing its thing, probably just made a choice, and gradually they'll make their way back to the start position, and after that they quickly will swim up into one of the choice zones, and this is from training what they've done, and then once they do that they'll be able to get some reward. The pellets are so tiny you can't even see them. So we're also then able to track the animals in real time, and that's what underpins the ability to then have this all controlled in closed loop. So it's just an example of that we can use that tracking to control the experiments, but at the same time we can get lots of this movement data that can be informative about what the animals understand about the task. So do goldfish prefer advanced information in this task? So this is just a schematic of the task contingencies, as I showed before. So you've got two alternatives. They both have a 50% chance of giving reward after a 5-second delay. And the informative option gives visual signals that are informative about what a particular trial outcome will be, while the non-informative one doesn't. In this case, both alternatives have the same reward rate. So it's really like the most simple way to try and explore this. And this is kind of just seeing it from the goldfish's perspective. First, it needs to swim to the back of the tank, and then it can make a choice by selecting one of these two alternatives. So for the experiment, we had 8 subjects. We ran them for about 30 days, many trials per day, and they're also forced trials and choice trials. And you know the usual things were sort of counterbalanced so that we could rule that issue out. So we were quite surprised to find that goldfish, over many sessions, didn't develop a preference for the informative option like we've seen in other species, despite the fact that compared to some other studies, they completed far more trials. What we did find, though, interestingly, was when we looked at response times in forced trials, which were interspersed with choice trials, individuals generally showed a longer time to respond to the informative option than the non-informative option, which is actually counter to what we'd expect, right? So taking longer might suggest that they actually value that option slightly less, so maybe a very subtle effect, which is not what we'd seen in quite a few other species. But one thing that we sort of wondered was whether this is just due to the fact that individuals hadn't really been able to learn the contingencies of the task. So critically, these two options differ in the amount of information they convey, the stimuli that they provide, and it's quite important that individuals are able to understand what information those stimuli are conveying. So we looked at the 5-second period between the choice and outcome period where the stimulus is available for individuals to anticipate the outcome, and we looked to see what the goldfish did, in particular how they moved. And so this is an example. I don't think I can get my cursor there, but what you can see is a sort of a heat map histogram of where the individuals were during this 5-second period while the stimuli were on. So on the left, where S plus is presented, on the left side of the rectangle, that's where the choice zones are and where food can be dispensed. And so when S plus is presented to the animals on the screen, they spend most of their time right up close to the screen, sort of waiting for the reward. For the non-informative cues, they also spend quite a lot of time hanging around by the feeder, potentially anticipating that there's a chance they'll get some reward. But when presented with the cue for no reward in the informative option, we find that in quite a lot of cases, individuals actually just swim away. They don't want to be close to it. And so that was an example session from one animal, but averaged across animals, that pattern kind of stands. We quantified these movement distributions using entropy as a metric. So the more animals move around, the higher the score will be. The more consistent they are, the lower it will be. And we kind of found that when consistent with the sort of probability of reward, individuals move around less when they're expecting reward. They stay close to the feeder, but they move around a lot more when the reward probability is low. So that gave us an indication that although animals show generally a reasonable discrimination between the stimuli in the task, they still didn't prefer the informative option. So generally, if we think about the mechanisms that I presented to you at the start of the talk, this could suggest that widely shared associative processes, conditioning processes, might not be sufficient to promote information-seeking preferences in this task, at least in goldfish. But if that principle is sort of extrapolated to other species, then it sort of lends weight to this idea that derived cognitive processes, perhaps more complex ones that require abstraction of variables and a sensitivity to uncertainty, are important in driving these preferences in other species where we do actually find them. And also that generally this a non-instrumental information-seeking paradigm can be used to comparatively investigate information-seeking behavior because it's something that can be deployed across very different animals. So that's the sort of end of the work I did during my PhD, but that led to some more questions that I've been lucky enough to start to pursue in my postdoc. So one of those things is this information seeking something that we find often in species that show some cognitive sophistication, right? Just very broadly, the goldfish didn't show it, but these kinds of preferences have been shown in macaques and humans and that kind of thing. So is this something that we might need to start thinking more about when we think about sophisticated cognition? And also, if it's the case that goldfish or fish in general don't show these preferences, that might suggest that in, for example, birds and mammals, these mechanisms arose independently rather than being something that's widely shared across all vertebrates. And so that sort of raises the question, is this something that has evolved independently many times? And one of the questions we didn't ask really was, how does this develop in animals, which I think is a really important question. And that leads to my work that I'm doing at the moment in Nikki Clayton's lab, where we're looking at trying to understand information-seeking behavior in cuttlefish, in cephalopods. So they're remarkably intelligent invertebrates. But we know that because they share a common ancestor with vertebrates about 500 million years ago, they independently evolved their sophisticated cognitive abilities from those vertebrate models. So this will give us a really nice idea about whether we can find these sorts of preferences evolving independently. And they don't live for very long, so they live for about 2 years. So they have short developmental periods, which makes them really nice to think about understanding the development of traits. So the first part of my project has been to try and take goldfish, which we've been able to use with the goldfish, and apply that to study information-seeking behavior and decision-making in general in the cuttlefish. And so we've made a little bit of progress. The first step is designing a new feeder. So those feeders for the goldfish are far too small. The pellets are far too small for the hungry cuttlefish. So we've made one on a much bigger size, which allows us to automate the delivery of food rewards for the cuttlefish, and also we're sort of working on refining the training methods so that we can hopefully explore non-instrumental information seeking in these animals. In the lab, we also have Eurasian jays, corvids, these remarkably intelligent birds, and that's something that I'd be I'm really excited about looking at, continuing to try to understand the mechanisms of curiosity in these animals. So I'm really open to sort of suggestions, ideas, and thoughts about the future of what would be exciting to look at. So just to give a final overview, I hope I've tried to sort of convince you that the comparative approach can provide valuable insights into information-seeking behavior that can tell us potentially about curiosity and its origins. That flexible information-seeking in animals might be underpinned by derived cognitive mechanisms, not just widespread, simple conditioning ones, and that they may be restricted to certain taxa, which could be telling about the function of these behaviors. But that further work is needed. For example, I only presented work on one fish species today, and so further work is needed to really pin down the evolutionary origins of these types of behaviors. So I just want to acknowledge the people, my supervisors, that have been so helpful and are great to work with for the work I've presented, and to you for listening. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for a few questions. just looking for junior scholars first. Okay.
This is the first junior scholar, so thank you very much. That was quite interesting. I have a question, and I don't know if you can answer, but if you have pointers. So if there is this variability, do you have any speculation about the neural mechanisms that sorts these the species apart?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really cool work from Ilya Monosov and Ethan Bromberg-Martin, I think, and others. But their initial work in this paradigm, I think, is what has brought back a lot of the interest. And they've identified, areas in the prefrontal cortex that are quite important in tracking uncertainty. They had a recent paper out that implicated the lateral habenula, so really conserved regions, which things like goldfish also have, but we haven't, we don't think we found the preference in goldfish. So I think it does potentially point to this cognitive complexity argument that you need to be able to abstract various variables in the world to have these preferences. So I guess it would be consistent with that.
So my question is a curiosity question. So you decided to use as your fish model a goldfish. Why did you do that and not something that is a predator?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good point. That would be the next best thing. It would be great to do, to have some species with ecological difference, and also potentially a wild caught type of predator. Mainly it was, in one sense, practical. This was the first time that this has been done with a fish. We had them available, but it would be great to do more in other fish species that vary in ecology and things like that.
Second question by the junior researcher. Following up, why would being a predator or not being a predator have anything to do with the information-seeking behavior? In particular, if the answer is that it has to do with potentially with some development of frontal cortex. I mean, what would be hanging on that?
No, I was just thinking that fish are of many kinds, and they have all living in, have very specialized foraging strategies, and predators may do information seeking in a different way for this specific reason. Goldfish is just wandering around and grabbing things from the ground. I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, so I remember in the 90s there were decision-making experiments with fish where they used paradise fish, Macropodus. And there was an important Hungarian group of ethologists that wrote multiple papers on fish decision-making using this other tiny exotic fish that is like 10 centimeter large, assuming that they have a different kind of decision-making apparatus than some other species, eventually a goldfish.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one comes to mind, the cleaner fish that have been shown to excel at these mirror recognition tests and all sorts of things like that. So I think it would be great to do.
Thank you so much, Victor.